We've got a startling admission from the head of the CDC that the agency has made serious mistakes during this COVID pandemic, which has killed more than 1 million Americans. The U.S. has by far the highest COVID death toll in the world. Dr. Rochelle Walensky is now calling for fundamental change to restore the public's trust as now monkeypox spreads and COVID numbers remain high in some places in the country. She spoke to our Dr. Jon LaPook in an exclusive TV interview last night.
Was the agency up to the task of handling this pandemic?
I think our public health infrastructure in the country was not up to the task of handling this pandemic.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky is vowing to revamp the CDC after its response to COVID-19.
We made some pretty public mistakes, and we need to own them.
This admission came after the CDC received the findings of an external review she ordered of the agency. The CDC says the review found the agency's COVID guidance was confusing and overwhelming.
Why did you go ahead and commission this external review?
You know, I think it's really important to understand the great work of this agency, but also to admit to areas where we needed to improve. We owe that to the American people.
The CDC says its new objectives are to share scientific findings and data faster, translate the science into practical, easy-to-understand policy, and develop what Dr. Walensky called special forces to fight future pandemics.
These epidemic events are getting more and more disruptive to health and to economy. And the reason we called it Event 201 is we knew eventually one of those days, one of those events would be the big one. And that big one would really challenge our capacity to respond. And to respond to the big one, we do need to have all hands on deck.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the J Lex Podcast. I am your host, J to the Lex. Please like, share, and subscribe to the content. As I've said before, I want to grow this platform out, and I hope you guys rock with me. You can find it on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Rumble. Let's get into it today. Today's topic, a mistake you say. Oh, really? This is referring to the CDC about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, coming out and saying that they made mistakes as it pertained to their handling of the Rona pandemic, whatever you want to call it. And I look and I say, mistakes. Oh, really? Some of the things that they said was the information that we were putting out there was confusing. We need to be more transparent with the public. We need to break down the science, and we need to make it digestible for the common person, basically. And I find all of this very interesting because people like myself, other people as well, I'm a nobody in the game, but other people were talking about this from day one. And I'm going to give you my opinion right off the top. There should have never been any lockdowns. There should have never been. We should have been able to live with this thing. There was no reason to have to quarantine for 10 days once you caught it. There was no need for any of it. All of this thing was a cold at the end of the day. I understand some people say, well, people died from it. People died from the flu as well. So let's stop the nonsense here, okay? There should not have been forced vaccines. People lost employment. People lost their jobs. Do you realize the last numbers that I saw, 165,000 small businesses had to shut down. Not because they ran out of money or anything along those lines, but because nobody was able to go out. In particular, restaurants. I asked this question: do those 165,000 small businesses get any type of compensation with interest from the mistakes that were made by the CDC? Does anybody go to prison over this? I ask you. If you get stopped by a cop and you're driving and you find out that your license is suspended, does the cop just say, oh, you know what? You didn't know about it. which a lot of times people don't. It's happened. Do you just get to turn around and not take responsibility? What's the idea? The idea is, well, you should have known, so you can either get a ticket and have to wait for somebody to come pick you up, or you can get arrested. And you might not even know. You might have gotten a ticket that you thought you paid for and you didn't. It happens. Life is busy. But you still are held responsible. Yet the people in the CDC and the NIH as well, we'll get to Fauci in a minute, are not held to the same standards as everybody else. And they're public officials. They're bureaucrats more than they are medical professionals. Don't even get me started with Fauci. He was the one who was supposed to eradicate HIV. But instead, what do we have today? Step up and prep up. You have HIV, but it's like you don't have HIV. What? All of these people are not held to the same standards. And who's going to prison over it? Is Rochelle, I think her name is Walensky, whatever, who cares? Does she lose her job? We have to better communicate the information. Duh. We know this. You guys were wrong. Now, maybe it doesn't go to the extent of you going to prison, although I think you guys should go to jail because you knew what was going on. But you shouldn't still be employed. A public official still getting money from the average everyday person. Does anybody go to jail over this? Do those small businesses that were shut down directly because of COVID get any type of compensation? Remember the whole essential workers thing? The essential workers, we want to bring home let's be clear. We know essential workers are important, quote unquote essential workers. Nurses, firefighters, policemen, etc. We know they're important. But it is not for the government to basically sit there and tell you that your job is not important. I don't care if you're a bartender, and for the most part, it was service business. Personal trainers, bartenders, amongst others, waiters, waitresses, massage therapists. Only people who were in the medical community were considered essential? What kind of bullshit is that? But you know what was open, I think, except for the state of Pennsylvania? Liquor stores. Oh yeah, liquor stores were still open. You could still go in, you just wore a mask. You see, I knew from minute one that they were bullshitting. Well, how did you know, Jay? Because I paid attention. Look, I wasn't a great student in school, but I can tell you I paid attention. What they were putting out there made no goddamn sense. The 6 feet that they were talking about made zero sense. So if you were 6 feet, 2 inches away, you weren't going to catch COVID? I think some former official came out and said it was an arbitrary number. It could have been 10 feet. You could be 100 feet away from somebody. You could have still caught COVID. The media should be held accountable as well for the lies that they sat there and told. Remember, every day it was this person, this number of people died this hour, this number of people have died that hour. Had certain people paranoid as hell, afraid to walk out of their house. Afraid to stand next to somebody, afraid to see other family members. For those who live in New York, you remember Cuomo, he was sitting there saying, you guys really shouldn't have too many people in the house. It wasn't just him, but there was other public officials. You shouldn't have too many people in the house. And then a guy like Cuomo was going to see his mother, which I personally don't have an issue with. He's entitled to go see his mother during Thanksgiving, and then he got a bunch of backlash. And he said, oh no, I'm not going to see them. And then they were trying to get people to rat on you if you had too many people in the house. What, I'm going to have a neighbor trying to count the number of people in my house through a window, trying to tattletale on me? What the Who goes to jail? Who gets compensated? Yes, I know they were out there printing money, which is why we have inflation as crazy as we do. Look at the destruction that this disease which allegedly supposedly came from a lab in Wuhan connected to Fauci, but it is what it is. Nobody's going to go to jail. Everybody sit there making money, and then they were sending you $600. So many small businesses, the backbone of this country, destroyed by a man-made disease, alleged supposedly. Nobody loses their jobs. Meanwhile, we never really talked about, because it's offensive, about what the real health epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, is. Obesity. And by the CDC's own numbers, admit, yes, 80% of the people who were hospitalized were morbidly overweight. But nobody talked about that. Fauci didn't talk about it. Fauci didn't talk about taking vitamins and things along those lines. No, wear a mask and get your booster shot. Wear a mask. At first he said, don't wear a mask. You don't have to. No, it's not a big deal. Then we found out later he lied. That alone should have gotten him fired. But okay, whatever. Then it was, we're going to eradicate it. The same guy who said he was going to eradicate AIDS. 30 years later, pulling the same bullshit. And y'all fell for it. Did you make changes to your diet? Did you stop going to McDonald's? Did you stop smoking cigarettes? That's the part that I really love, even to this day. Even 2 years later, I'll see people out there wearing masks, walking around, broad daylight during the summer, wearing a mask, will lift the mask up to take a puff of a Marlboro. Oh, it is the most hilarious thing when I see that. As if this vaccine was the cure-all. Anybody who studied any basic science knows that viruses cannot be cured. That's why there's always the common cold. The lies that they were putting out there were unlike anything I've ever seen. Well, this one's different. It can live on surfaces and the whole bit. And I'm sitting there just thinking, oh my gosh. I was an average student in school, and even I know this is bullshit. And so what were people's responses? They tried to shame you. Well, you're not a doctor. You're just a trainer. Well, it doesn't matter if I'm a trainer or not. I know what I'm talking about. I may not have studied, microbiology. I may not have studied virology. But there were plenty of doctors out here who were saying that this was BS. And then y'all sit there and shame medical professionals. On YouTube and other forms of social media, the guy who created the mRNA vaccine, the technology, was being shamed. The guy who created it was like, nah, there's no need for this. No need for children to be vaccinated and any of those things. The guy who created it, I believe his name is Robert Malone, who created it, said this, a medical professional who's telling you that you don't have to do this. And y'all sit there and allow CNN and other networks to sit there and shame him and get him off social media. This was the biggest marketing scheme I think I've ever seen in my entire life. This was like Super Bowl commercial level greatness on their part. And you know who the beyond the corrupt people? It's the average everyday person who fell for it. Well, Jay, what were we supposed to do? You're supposed to do your research and you're supposed to ask questions. How many times did I jump up on Facebook, Fedbook, and see people showing their Vax cards? People being discriminated against. Oh yeah, I know. It's that. Yes, you can be discriminated against more than based upon the color of your skin or your religion. Yes, you can be discriminated against medically. There were doctors' offices who weren't allowing patients to come in if they weren't vaccinated. I'd like to know how much money they got. Because we know this all comes down to the green. Or crypto or whatever currency that they use. This was the greatest form of discrimination that I've seen in my lifetime. And yes, I know people are going to say, well, what about racism? I've grown up in a time of racism, but I didn't grow up in a time of real racism. Real racism was back when there were policies put in place so that you couldn't use the same water fountain as a Caucasian person. That's real racism right there. What we have today is diet racism, but that'll be another story for another day. Yes, people were discriminated against during these times. Heaven forbid you try to think for yourself. You have doctors' offices. There are places like Ecuador, where if you didn't have the vaccine, you couldn't go to the supermarket. And that is essential. I know somebody in Ecuador who was forced to get the vaccine because she couldn't go to the supermarket so that she could get groceries for her and her son. What the fuck? When do politicians have to face the music? If you do some bullshit, you don't get to keep your job. You don't get a pay raise. You get fired. If not worse. This is criminality. I've never seen anything like this before. And where is the heat on the pharmaceutical companies? You know something I just found out this weekend? You know, one of the side effects of taking the vaccine or the boosters, I forget which one it is you can get the inflammation of the heart. It's called myocarditis. I'm mistaking the word, but it's myocardio something. I can't remember what it is now off the top of my head. But basically, it's inflammation of the heart. People who are getting the vaccine, soccer players, football players, people along those lines, fairly athletic people and young people were sitting there getting inflamed hearts and having heart attacks. Do you know who owns the patents for the medication for the inflamed heart? Myocardio, whatever it's called. Moderna. I just found this out over the weekend. They own the goddamn patents for one of the side effects of what their medication does. Do you not see what the hell is going on here? I mean, really, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how many times while I'm doing these shows that I'm going to tell you, if I talk about health, this is very simple. You don't got to go crazy, and it's got to be epic. You don't have to go over the top. You eat as organically as you can afford. You take vitamins and supplements based upon what you need. You exercise safely and effectively and regularly. You limit your alcohol consumption. You limit your sugar consumption. You want to have truly good health? A vaccine is not going to do it for you. A jab in the arm that was being forced upon people is not going to do it for you. Which government officials are going to go to jail over that? How many people lost their jobs? Are the nurses and the doctors and the other medical professionals, the essential workers, who were the only important job the only important job at the height of this hysteria, now all of a sudden being discriminated against? Being told that either they get the jab or they get fired? Do they get compensation for the time lost on the job plus interest? Do the people who fired them lose their jobs or go to prison? These are the questions that we have to ask, and these are the questions that we have to push. We all know, for those of us who pay attention, that this is part of a bigger plan. You can look up the Great Reset. You don't have to believe me. Look it up yourself. People are going to call it, oh, you're just being a conspiracy theorist. You know what the thing about conspiracy theories is? When those conspiracy theories start to become true, they're no longer conspiracies. For whatever you might think about Alex Jones and other people, and I don't particularly care for his delivery, but the information that man was putting out there was ahead of its time. He knew what was going on. And for those of you who want to sit there and pretend, oh, that's not what's really happening and blah, blah, blah. There's other people out there who are content creators who try to dismiss him. Amongst other people. I told you, they were medical professionals who were talking about this. Who are having their licenses, their medical licenses threatened by talking about talking about the truth, I should say. We allowed medical discrimination because of fear. And a good portion of you are still overweight, are still eating Wendy's. I go by these places all the time. I see the lines. I get it. It's easier. But guess what? Everything in life isn't easy. When are people going to be held accountable for the BS that they pulled? Because if that's the case, then we might as well not have rules. I don't want to hear about it's the law. I don't care. Look at what COVID did to a bunch of major cities. Look at the BS that went on. Look at New York City as an example. That cesspool of a city. It's always kind of been under the surface, but now it's full blown. And there are still certain parts of New York City that you have to prove vaccination, even though it's been proven that the vaccine is doesn't work. That's not my opinion. That is a scientific fact. How many independent journalists came out here and said these things and were discriminated against, and people were trying to take them off of social media? Do those people who were wrong and knew that they were wrong ever get to see the inside of a prison cell? And I can tell you right now, all the BS that we heard about, this is a new disease, we don't know about it. Nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. Go and look up Event 201. I think it's still on YouTube. Go and look it up. And you'll see, funded by the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You will see they knew at least in 2018 that all of this was going to happen. This was orchestrated. You don't have to believe me. Go look up Event 201. They knew this was going to happen. They did mock trials and mock reports and the whole thing to see what the public's reaction was going to be. They knew exactly what was going to happen, and they put everything into motion. Because remember, even before this, they were getting people conditioned and ready. How do we know? Remember Ebola hit New York City? Oh my God, it was the end of the world, and then Ebola went away. And then we had Zika. Remember that? You couldn't travel to... They didn't want you traveling to certain countries because Zika's blah, blah, blah. I remember I was going to Costa Rica. I think 2016. Oh my gosh, you're going to Costa Rica? Oh my God, it's dangerous. Blah, 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 blah. It was all done to condition you. Now what do we have? We have monkeypox. Now they're ramping up New York City, I think gave $11 million, and they're ramping up production as if it's difficult to ramp up production. This is nothing more than a bunch of pharmaceutical companies getting paid with your dollars by your government. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to continue to vote in the same people over and over again who are benefiting from this? You think for 2 seconds that the people in Congress didn't? The people in Congress heard about how bad this whole setup was going to be, and they started dropping stocks because they knew they were going to lose money. Does nobody go to jail? I mean, hell, Martha Stewart went to jail for 5 months for insider trading. Does Congress not go to jail over the bullshit that's going on? Are we to just continuously and repeatedly have to accept certain things like this? Because it's only going to get worse. They're only going to come from where your rights. There's going to be another pandemic out there. I don't know what it is. It's going to be something else. Monkeypox is the thing right now. They're like, all right, it's not the worst disease. I mean, I've seen the pictures. It looks terrible. Looks like, chickenpox on crack. But at what point do people start to step up and say, enough is enough? When does it stop? How can we just continue to allow this to happen? And all your infighting does nothing to rectify the situation. All you do is argue amongst yourselves. A good portion of you are still obese. Not even out of shape, obese. You do nothing to improve your health. And you expect the government to come and save you. Well, guess what? Newsflash, they're not going to save you. The fact that schools are trying to force vaccinations and masks upon children, those administrators should be fired. Still, some places in this country you can't move around without having to show a Vax card. There's certain places in New York City, certain restaurants you go to, you can't show a Vax card. I mean, what? But what do I know? I'm just a personal trainer. And I'm just a podcaster who has an idea that differs from the rest of the crowd. But y'all are okay with this. Like I said, they took what was a medical issue that they created and turned it into a political issue. And y'all fell for the okie doke. They're going to do what they do. They're corrupt. They're lowlives. You have to start stepping up. You have to be the ones to look and say, you know what? This is enough. I've had enough. It's time to start voting people out. You know, what's that old thing Donald Trump used to say? Like, drain the swamp? I mean, he didn't do much with it. I know he tried to put it out there a little bit. But you need to drain the goddamn swamp. Bill Gates needs to be in prison. Anthony Fauci needs to be in prison. Rochelle Walensky needs to be in prison. Most of the people who work at the CDC and the NIH and the rest of these places need to be in prison. Otherwise, don't talk to me about rules and regulations and laws and all that other stuff. It's bullshit. And until that changes, nothing else is going to change. People need to be held for the crimes that they committed. And this was a crime against humanity. Just like the wars that are out there going on right now, the never-ending wars where defense contractors make money, this is no different. Instead of trying to take licenses from good quality doctors, what you should be doing is putting these bureaucrats behind bars. Or executing them, but I know that's a little bit extreme for some of y'all. When does it change, I ask? If not now, when? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the JLex Podcast. You can catch the JLex Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Instagram. Take care. Till next time.